For thousands of years, one claim in ancient history has baffled readers, scientists, and theologians alike. According to some of the oldest records humanity possesses, there was once a time when humans lived not for decades, but for centuries. In these records, lifespans of 600, 700, even 900 years are described as if they were completely normal. One ancient patriarch named Methuselah is said to have lived an astonishing 969 years, nearly 1,000 years of life. Today, that number sounds impossible. Modern science tells us the human body cannot last that long. Cells age. DNA breaks down. Telomeres shorten. Eventually, the body reaches its biological limit. Yet the ancient texts insist the earliest humans lived far longer than we do today. So the question becomes unavoidable. Were these records exaggerations, or was the world itself once fundamentally different? Because if humans truly lived for centuries, something extraordinary must have changed. Something about the environment, the biology of early humans, or even the structure of the world itself may have shifted dramatically. And if that shift happened once in the past understanding, it could reveal something profound about human history, about our origins, and about the mysterious world that existed before the Great Flood described in Genesis. The earliest chapters of Genesis contain a list that has puzzled scholars for generations. It is known as the genealogy of the antediluvian patriarchs, the line of humans who lived before the flood. The ages recorded there are unlike anything we see today. Adam is said to have lived 930 years. Seth lived 912. Enosh lived 905. Jared lived 962. Methuselah, the longest lived of them, all reached the remarkable age of 969 years. These numbers appear again and again in the ancient records, suggesting that long lifespans were not rare exceptions, but the normal state of humanity during that early era. For many modern readers, the immediate assumption is that these numbers must be symbolic. Perhaps they represent dynasties or lunar months, or some forgotten system of counting years. But attempts to reinterpret the numbers have repeatedly run into problems. The genealogies remain internally consistent. The ages follow patterns that appear intentional rather than metaphorical. And similar traditions about extraordinarily long-lived ancestors appear not only in the Hebrew scriptures, but also in other ancient cultures. Mesopotamian king lists, for example, describe rulers who lived for hundreds or even thousands of years before a catastrophic flood ended their civilization. Why would multiple ancient traditions preserve the same strange idea? Could they be remembering something real? Modern biology places strict limits on how long humans can live. Scientists studying aging often focus on structures within our cells called telomeres. Telomeres act like protective caps at the ends of chromosomes, preventing DNA from deteriorating during cell division. But every time a cell divides, those telomeres grow slightly shorter. Eventually, they become too short to protect the chromosome, and the cell can no longer replicate safely. This process is one of the fundamental mechanisms behind aging. Yet some researchers suggest that under certain conditions, telomere shortening could occur far more slowly than it does today. If the rate of cellular damage were dramatically reduced, human lifespans could theoretically extend far beyond current limits. In other words, the biological machinery required for extreme longevity may already exist within us. The question becomes whether the environment of the ancient world allowed that machinery to operate differently. What if early humans lived under conditions that slowed the aging process itself? The ancient narrative describes a world that may have been radically different from our own. Some researchers have proposed that the atmosphere before the flood could have been thicker or more protective than it is today. A denser atmosphere might have shielded the Earth from cosmic radiation, one of the major contributors to genetic damage over time. Reduced radiation exposure would mean fewer mutations in DNA and slower cellular deterioration. Others have speculated about atmospheric composition. Higher oxygen concentrations or different pressure conditions could theoretically affect metabolism and tissue repair. While these ideas remain controversial, they raise an intriguing possibility. The environment of early Earth may have supported biological longevity far beyond modern norms. If this ancient biosphere truly existed, then the flood described in Genesis might represent not only a geological catastrophe, but also a biological turning point in human history. One of the most fascinating details in the Genesis record is what happens after the flood. Human lifespans begin to decline rapidly. Noah is said to have lived 950 years, but his descendants lived progressively shorter lives. Within only a few generations, lifespans dropped from centuries to little more than 100 years. This sudden shift suggests that something about the world had changed permanently. Whether through environmental upheaval, atmospheric transformation, or genetic degradation, humanity entered a new era in which extreme longevity was no longer possible. But the mystery remains. What exactly caused the change? To answer that question, we must look beyond the simple question of age. Because the story of the ancient world is not only about human longevity, it is also about a civilization that may have possessed knowledge, conditions, and experiences completely different from anything we know today. And as we continue exploring the clues left behind in ancient texts, archaeology, and modern science, a larger picture begins to emerge. A picture of a lost world that may have been far more advanced, far more stable, and far more mysterious than we ever imagined. And if the records are even partially correct, then the real question is not whether humans once lived for centuries. The real question is why they stopped.